Hi, and welcome to the Reclamation Project podcast. We are so glad that you're here, that you're listening, and hopefully that you are a part of the conversation. Today, we are going to continue going through our series on love and marriage and relationships, and specifically what we're looking at today is being single. Now, I want to stop and just throw out my disclaimer right here. For those of you who are married, this podcast is for you as well. And the reason that we kind of want you to listen is because you can come alongside and support and love and help people who are single in their pursuit of their purpose and in their pursuit of where God has them in this season. And it's not a bad thing for them to be single. So we touched on that in the last podcast. So if you're married and you have people who are single, either in your family, your coworkers, your friends, we want you to understand what those people are going through. And hopefully you can come alongside them and support them in their pursuit of that single life and in their pursuit of seeking out God in their single life and in the season of being single. So with that said, we are diving into the thought of being single. And last time we talked about the beauty of being single, and being single really is a beautiful thing. And so if you didn't listen to the last podcast, go back and listen to that. But today we're going to go to the flip side of that, and that's to really look at the dark side of being single. And in that, we really feel like there's a couple different temptations that we can struggle with, as well as one of the big things these days is how to date as a Christian when you're single. Gary and I have very little experience with that over the last at least 10 years. For me, I have not dated anyone.
41 for me, so I'm way out of the...
And 41 for Gary. So that said, we're going to try to bring perspective to that just from people we've been around and things that we've seen. But at the same time, we know that that's a hard thing. Mm-hmm. So first, let's just dive into temptation. And with temptation, we think that is just sex. I mean, that's the first thing that comes to mind. Single, your temptation as a Christian is sex. But I think there's a bigger temptation out there, and that is to want out of this season of being single, to want out of that relationship status, as you'd put it on Facebook. Yeah. You want to go from being single to either it's complicated or in a relationship or married. Yeah. But a lot of times when we do that, when we want out so badly, we tend to settle. And we kind of talked about that last podcast. We tend to settle, and we have that temptation to settle sometimes when we're single.
You know, we talked about a couple podcasts ago, the understanding your soul IDs, and there is one of those IDs, one of those human needs that we have to meet and will meet, either positive or negative, and that's that one to be loved. Everyone has a need to either give out love and have it received, or to be loved and receive it. And so that need is so strong that if you don't know how to master it, you will settle for something else. It'll even cause you to compromise your core beliefs, your core morals. And we talked on your last podcast, maybe you already did your mission statement, your vision statement. It'll even cause you to work around that need to be met. If it's not managed correctly, will cause you to do that. So I think that's right. And I think we talked a little bit off the air between our last podcast and today's podcast about the subculture even in a church. So the idea is, if I want a good Christian girl, I'm going to go to church. If I want a nice Christian guy, I'm going to go to church. And certainly that would be the first place. I was talking to my niece, and she's had a lot of boyfriends, and I told her, listen, I understand you want to catch the prize fish, but you don't find that when you throw your line in the canal. So you're probably got a better shot of finding that person who you think would be right at the church. But there's a subculture in the church when it comes to dating. Even back in your day, did you ever recognize that, Jeremy? Did you feel that?
I think there was, especially in the church that we were at, that was a subculture, but I don't think it was in every church. I talked to you off air about this girl that I was dating. Yeah. Dating. That's not the term for it. We went out once. And she pursued me on MySpace. For those of you who don't know what MySpace is, Google it. and you'll find out. But she pursued me on MySpace, and she was a Christian. You know, she said she went to a church nearby. I knew of the church. I knew people who worked there, and we went to church that Sunday night. And we talked, and we went to Applebee's after. And as we're at Applebee's, she asked me what my views on sex are, and I'm like, well, you know, at that, you know, this is what I believe is right. And
Yep.
and she said, yeah, well, that's not what I think. And total culture, you know, so so I think to answer your question all the way around, back around to it, is I think there is the belief that or at that time was that the subculture of church was that way. However, I don't think it necessarily was, and at least in church as a larger term, maybe not, I don't know. It was kind of turning at the point where
and since you have been, it has changed because due to the way our culture is and has been, single ministries are probably demographically one of the largest groups that growing in churches. And I think it's some of the false meanings that come to that. It's like if I'm at a church singles group, and these are good, they're all good people, as if we believe there's no predators at a church singles group, and therefore it's almost like all the rules don't apply because they're a good Christian person. I sat with a young lady that's part of a pretty large singles group at her church, pretty large church, and she asked me, like, from a pastor's perspective, how many dates do you think we should do before we have sex? And caught me off guard a little bit, and I said, you know, somewhere between 0 and 1,000, because God's word is still pretty clear, and just because it's a Christian person and a Christian group, which makes it hard for all you singles pastors out there. God bless you. You have maybe that and a garbage man got to be the two hardest jobs on the planet. I was telling Jeremy off air, there was a large church that asked me if I wanted to be their singles pastor. They had thousands of singles in that church, and I asked him what the age limit was of the single group, and he said, well, somewhere between 22 and 50. And I said, not interested. My job is not to babysit and keep the 48-year-old double divorce guy away from the 23-year-old hottie. That is not ministry to me. But that's that's the subculture you find in a church group. And again, if you're not strong, and if you didn't listen to the first podcast, last week's podcast, you really need to, because if you have a mission statement and a vision statement and you find out who you are and what you believe, these temptations aren't quite as powerful.
Well, they are and they aren't. I mean, it at least gives you a focus and a purpose and shows you where you want to go. It's whether or not you want to look at that mission statement, vision statement. Yeah. You know, as you're going out with that person, you're probably tucking it away in the, you know, in the attic somewhere or something. But I think that, I mean, if you focus on that, if you focus on what God's purposed you for, and you're looking at that and you're living it out, you know, and you're really desiring it every single day, and in the moments, almost every moment, it's that temptation grows slimmer. Yeah. But I think we're all still tempted to either settle or, you know, which the other temptation that we talked about, which everyone thinks right away, is, you know, sex. Yeah. You know, so I mean, and I think it's difficult because I told Katie this after we got married. It's probably about 2 years after we got married. I realized that there were new dating apps out there. I don't know if Tinder was around at that point. She told me, you know, if I ever find that on your phone, you're in trouble. And I didn't even know what it was at the time. But I told her, I said, you know what, just in 2 years, 2 or 3 years at that point, you know, the difference between dating when we got married versus dating now is the social acceptance and not even the social acceptance, but the church acceptance of sex and everything. I mean, I'd be, for lack of a better term, screwed in dating.
Well, that's apropos.
Maybe
word.
I should
that's metaphorically
edit that
correct.
out. Yes. Yeah. but I just would I'd be done. Yeah. I mean I'd be done.
And for me, that's been, as a pastor who's been in ministry for quite a while, you know, I don't even want to tell how many years that'll give but it's over 25. That I guess my biggest disappointment, not necessarily in people. People fail. I get it. I do too. But I think it's the relaxing and really the cause of some of that subculture in the church is the church itself. Yeah. I know pastors who are afraid to draw hard lines, because to draw a hard line could lose half your praise team, 3 of your elders, and everybody that teaches junior Sunday school. So I understand the dilemma that we've painted ourselves into, the box we painted ourselves into. But again, so you do need a focal point of where to stand when everything's a little shaky, and that you set that up before you enter the dating pool. There's a better chance you're going to navigate it than if you went in, willy-nilly. And like, willy-nilly, who uses words like that anymore? I can't believe I said that. It's not like my grandmother. If it'd be navigating something, if you got a plan and you got a statement and you have a vision of what you're looking for.
Well, yeah, and it's easier as a focal point, right?
Yeah.
But the truth is it's very, it's difficult to keep your focus. Yeah. Especially in this day and age where people don't keep their focus for more than 15 minutes. Yeah. Right? Me included. Oh, there's a squirrel. Okay. Yeah. So, but the thing is it's difficult. So I think the next point, and Gary, we didn't talk about this as part of our show prep, or our
this
podcast
is gonna be
prep.
Interesting.
But so I think the thing is if you're focused, you're less susceptible. But if you lose your focus, you could fail. Yeah. How do you get back up on the horse?
So what we're saying is, here you are and you failed.
Yes.
Where do I go now?
Where do you go now? How do you get back to the place that God wants you? I know for me that was always a hard thing is accepting my failure. Yeah. Accepting the ways that I've screwed up when I know I shouldn't be doing this and I'm doing this anyways. Yeah. And then saying, okay, you know what? I need to circle back around and get back to where God wanted me.
And actually the answer to that is as simple as it's always been, even 2,000 years ago. It's the difference is allowing that shame and guilt that there again, I didn't stick to my guns. I compromised my morals and my beliefs, and therefore getting on the horse seems like hard again. But it's honestly, and not to oversimplify what grace is, but God is a forgiving God. And at that point, the human nature is once I've failed, I run away from God, just like Adam did in Genesis 3. And that only exacerbates the pain and the suffering.
Well, and that could cause you to go further down the rabbit hole, True. If you give into the temptation of sex as a single person, and then you're like, man, I don't, how do I get back? Or it's the other spectrum is well, I've screwed up. I can't go back. I can't face, kind of like the prodigal son. I can't face my father at this point. I got to clean myself up. I got to do this. I got to do that. But the truth is you need to just head straight back. There's a repentance, there's a reconciliation, there's a healing that needs to happen.
And the sooner you apply that, the better. It's, again, wallowing in your mistake and your compromising of your own values and morals doesn't make it any better. And in this grace-filled age we live in, I know when I understood grace more than just a theological concept and was actually reality, it changed how I even deal with people. And I understand there's a lot of people out there, they love grace because and I always tell them, if you adhere to grace just because it gives you the freedom to say damn and have a Bud Light, then you're wallowing in the shallow end of the grace pool. That's not what it's for. But the truth is I made a mistake, and at that point I run to the one who I love and loves me. We talked about in the last podcast, if you're single, nurturing that relationship with the Father and becoming intimate with Him. And then when I mess up, it's easy to run to Him. It's when I've distanced that relationship, or I find I'm a single person and I find the new single person. And what do you do when you meet somebody? You think about them all the time. You call them, you text them, and it's the natural part of nature where everybody else, God included, gets shoved into the background a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that's important to know too. Is when your focus shouldn't only be the mission statement, vision statement that you have, but your focus also needs to be on God Himself. And so when you're meeting that new person and that temptation starts rearing itself.
Mm-hmm.
If your focus is more on God, if the relationship
Correct.
focus,
Yes.
not just your focus, but the relationship focus is on God,
Yeah.
and how do we involve him and make him the center of our relationship, if that happens, then you lessen that ability
Yes.
of temptation to manifest itself and grow and grow and grow until you give in.
And that's that part of the self-awareness. We talked a few times when we talked about communication or relationship when you fight, and we coined the 3rd and 10 as a football metaphor. When it's 3rd and 10, they're probably going to pass, so you set up for a pass. So you 3rd and 10 relationship. I'm dating a new guy, so I'm on a 3rd and 10 this first date. I know my weaknesses. He'll say the right things. He's going to tell me I'm pretty. And so I'm speaking from a girl's perspective now, before any of you out there are thinking anything weird. They tell me I'm pretty. They say all the right things, and therefore all my, I prepare for that in advance, because if I don't, those are all the things that are needs I'm going to be met, and those are the things that once they're met, if I'm not ready for it, it'll be easier, as you said, that slippery slope of compromise. So, that it happens even within the church culture, and sometimes that even makes it harder once you've fallen. Like now I'm disappointed in my singles pastor, all the other girls in my small group who were excited, and they've been praying for me and this guy, to get together, and we went on a date, and they all rejoiced, and now we failed. It's as easy as grace, and as difficult as true grace.
Well, and I this may get cut. I don't know. I've been debating this, but that was me. I mean, I fell into temptation with that a few different times, and I had a hard time coming back to that, because I was like, man, I failed not only myself, I failed God, I failed the people that I'm working with, I failed the people, the any ministry that I have, whether it be music or teaching or whatever. That was always a hard thing for me. And that is a difficult thing to come back to, because you just say, well, I've messed up. It's kind of like, and I know I'm about to possibly swerve this off into a direction we don't want it to go. But I was watching Jersey Shore last night.
We need to talk to Jerry about his TV choices.
Watching Jersey Shore, their reunion season, and this
reunion.
guy cheats on his girlfriend, and he can't get a hold of her, and he thinks she's just mad at him, and it's over. She's done. This relationship's over. He still can't get a hold of her, and he's like, okay, I'm just gonna go and I'm gonna hook up with every girl right now and do this and that. It's just like, I think that's kind of the way that this temptation of sex can sometimes, hey, I've messed up, so let me continue as biblical. I went Jersey Shore, now I'll go biblical. Yeah. Let me continue to sin and let grace abound.
Yeah.
And I think that's an easy thing to do. Hey, I let these people down. I let myself down. I let God down. I'm already there. I might as well just keep going. Yeah.
It's a self-deprecating, self-loathing thing we do. Funny, you said that prompted one of the girls. She's probably in her mid-30s, but she is exemplifying the very thing that we're talking about, and so she fell. She met a guy at her church, and they made a mistake, and now she doesn't know if she could even go back, and can they pursue this relationship now that they've fallen, and I asked her, what did you do the minute you guys slipped up? She said, I went home, and I told God, I'm sorry I let you down. I asked for forgiveness. I said, how do you feel right now? She said, you know what? I feel forgiven. She goes, but why? Why do those temptations have to come? I said, you know what? Again, if you reframe this, sometimes temptations come to show you how far you've come. I said, because your history is the minute you fall, you go on a 10-day binge because you're already down. And so it's a way to punish yourself is all it is. Yep. And I go, but look how far you've come. You made a mistake, with a guy, and she goes, we both called each other, we both forgave each other, we believe God forgive us. Wow, look how far you've come. It took that, there are other ways to see how far you come, but that temptation shows you how far you've come. So we reframed that, and she'll walk away, I believe, even stronger. And so again, her victory is not just for her. I'm telling her story, so her victory is for everybody else too. You find yourself there. You go to the one who loves you unconditionally and already forgave you before you're born, and you confess, and you're stronger because of it.
Yeah. So those are the temptations, right?
Yes.
Let's talk about dating.
Dating. Yeah, dating.
Dating in this day and age. And we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but like I said, I don't envy anybody who's single right now who has to date. I mean, there are so many avenues. There's eHarmony, and I've known.
Nope.
Don't get me wrong. I know people who have met on eHarmony, who are married, have great marriage, kids, everything.
Honestly, Jeremy, I was just going through some of my old files not too long ago because I'm getting ready to do a wedding, and 13 out of my last 18 weddings have met on like a social media platform. Christian Mingle, eHarmony, the good ones, Christian Mingle, that cracks me up.
Christian Mingle, yeah.
Yeah.
I have a story about that, but I don't want to say it. Anyways, it doesn't involve me. It's something I just read an article on. Anyways, so yeah, you have all these opportunities. I mean, like I said, back in the day it was MySpace for me, and that's just when we're starting to get into internet dating. I had a couple of girls pursue me on MySpace. But there's eHarmony, there's Christian Mingle, there's farmers.com.
Farmers.com.
But then you get into things like, Tinder and,
not a dating app per se.
Not a dating app per se. And so dating becomes difficult because it's all about, you're presenting yourself in the most, how do I put this? Most advantageous, amazing way in order to almost elicit a response.
Yeah, it's funny because I was just reading an article. Ryan Anderson, he's a writer for Psychology Today, talk again, and I'm all for online dating. I think it serves a purpose. I think it takes away some of the awkwardness. It lets you do some of get the pre stuff out of the way, awkwardness. But he writes of 5 things that are wrong about online dating. He said the first one is people lie on their online dating profiles. I mean, and they actually did a study. They talked to 1,000 people, men and women, and 48% of men said they lie, and 28% of women said they lie. So my daughter, she did Christian Mingle once when she waited till she was 32 to get married, and she went through her loneliness spot. And so my daughter's 5'9.5", 5'10", and one of her prerequisites, I got to have a guy that's at least 6 foot. I want a guy who's taller. So this guy online, and it seemed really nice, and he said he was 6'1", and so she's met at a restaurant. She goes, I'm sitting there, and he walks in, and I looked at him. The first thing she said, I was like, do you think I couldn't tell that you're 5'8"? There's certain things you can lie about and get through with, but lying that you're 6 foot when you're 5'8", it's just not, So, again, I go into online dating knowing this. I'm prepared that people lie on their dating profile. The second thing is the misconception in our culture is that if you're on an online dating, then you want sex. That's kind of the misunderstood, the unsaid thing, and that's not true, especially, and you say, well, that's why I do Christian Mingle. It goes for Christian Mingle just as much as it goes for eHarmony. So he said, if you have to understand that, so that's some of your online dialogue before you meet somebody that I don't know what again, it's all perception, right? My perception is, I would say I'm looking for a person. Their perception is that this is what you want. It's the old story about the little boy and girl. They got an elevator, and they both had chocolate ice cream cones. And then a rich lady gets on with a white fur coat, and the boy accidentally bumps into her and gets chocolate ice cream all over her white coat. And his sister says, darn it, Johnny, you got fur all over your ice cream. Really, it's perspective, right? And so my perspective, I need to communicate with that person. Here's my view of online dating is this. So you set it in stone before you even meet.
Well, and let me just interject. Is when you do that, not compromising, and again, not settling. Because when you start to compromise and settle, okay, well, hey, he's the only person who reached out to me, who
Yeah.
who messaged me, who wants to get a hold. Well, don't settle, don't change what you desire because that's the only person.
So that would be a temptation.
Yeah, maybe the person who you're supposed to be with is the person who's 8 months from now.
Yes.
And if you settle and compromise here, you've caused issues with the one 8 months from now.
Yeah. The fourth and fifth one, or the third and fourth one, were really important because he said, proven fact that 80% of those relationships don't last. So before you think about not doing it, you could be the 20% that does last. Again, I told you I don't know what the percentage is, but the higher percentage of marriages I've done met that way. But I think the last one, which he believes is wrong with online dating, really is where the rubber hits the road. It causes you to be picky and judgmental. So instead of going into a relationship saying a real relationship serves and loves somebody, now I'm really getting picky. I'm getting judgmental. I'm looking at you'd be surprised at the shallowness of some of the reasons people don't date people. His left ear hangs a little bit lower than the right ear. But so if your expectation is you're going to find Mr. or Mrs. Perfect online, let me tell you, if you find them, they're probably not going to date you anyway because they have a lot of options. So you got to be careful about becoming judgmental. Then you're only looking external. And then so if they don't meet this external guide list you have, you don't even take time to look deep inside. The young lady I was with today is just amazed at the guy she's been dating. She goes, he doesn't fit my type or my profile. And I said, well, the reason you're meeting with a counselor is because your type or profile hasn't worked for the last 7 years. So I'm glad but what's different about him? She goes, he's kind and he's loving and he's compassionate and okay. So all your need to have met goals were all external, know. So that is some of the faults with online dating, and again, it has its positive side too.
Well, and I'll piggyback off that is, when you're looking at the external, you do limit your options. I had a friend. We don't talk much anymore, but they told me, as they're dating, they said, I completely am not attracted to them. Not physically attracted to them. But as their dating relationship grew, they said, you know what, I really have come to love them in a way that's not based off of the external. Yeah. And that couple's been married for goodness, 15, 20 years and that's kids something. And when I first heard it, I was like, you're not attracted to them? Yeah. That's just, how can you not be attracted to your spouse physically? Yeah. And as it went, as it went on, it grew. Yeah. That part grew because the emotional, the connection that they had, just on a behavior, on a on a different level that just made the relationship grow.
Because love is a choice and not an observation, and choices come when you get to know somebody and you're able to get all the data and you make a choice. Back in the day when I used to have a radio show, I interviewed this lady. She's a Christian speaker, travels around. She's from India. And she introduced me to another lady, and we tried to get online, but I talked to her actually off the air. So in India, she was in an arranged marriage. She was 19 when her mom and dad married her to someone they'd already had arranged from the time she was 1. She'd only met him once. And so she said, on my wedding night, it almost felt like rape. I didn't know this man, but it was arranged. And she said, it took me 5 years to love this guy. They at the time I talked to her, they were married 27 years. It took 5 years for her to grow. I mean, she was bound by culture and the rules that they had there. There were no such thing as divorce because it was always the woman's fault and it would be a very lowly position. So she gutted it out, and he had to do his part somewhere in there. He must have showed her unconditionally that he loved her, but it took 5 years for her to fall in love with him. And now they've been married 28 years. So out of 28 minus 5 is 23 years she was in love with this guy. But to your point, if it was just what his picture profile looks like on Christian Mingle, they wouldn't be together today.
Yeah. And that's why, I mean, that's one of the reasons dating, I think, like I said, I don't envy the current crop of single people having to date is because dating is just such a different animal than it was when I was single, and that was only 10 years ago. I mean, it's really difficult, and you really have to be, to a certain extent, without being superficial, selective in who you date. And not only that, but what boundaries you set up for dating. So what boundaries can we set up for dating?
Well, again, those boundaries they must come from the inside out. You set your boundaries based on your beliefs and your morals. If my desire is to be pure, maybe my other relationships haven't, but I told God in this time I've been single, and I found out about myself, and God moved in my heart, and I said, I'm going to wait till I'm married before I have sex, then that's got to be a boundary.
Yeah, and with that, you have to set parameters around that boundary,
Correct.
Because, again, it goes back to what you said earlier is, what gets you there, what makes you tick, what makes you, get to a point where that temptation becomes stronger and you're more susceptible to it. So you have to create those boundaries around that, because hopefully as you're single, you're learning who you are, like we said in the last podcast, and you're learning how you work, and you're working through your baggage. So hopefully, hey, you know what? These are non-negotiable things that I can't do. Because the times that you negotiate those, or where you let those go just a little bit, those are times where you fall into temptation.
So what I hear you saying too, that we have this idea that boundaries are for the other person, but boundaries are for us.
Yeah.
So I met with a guy, and he'd had a pretty promiscuous past, and God saved him radically, and so he set up these boundaries, and he said, I said I'm not going to have sex until I'm married, and he said so. Sex would be a home run for him. He said, but I'm in a relationship where I'm in a pickle between third and home. I'm like, well, the idea is never to leave first base, So we go back to the temptation again. I can have that goal of I won't do that, but if I constantly put myself on third base trying to steal home, there's a better chance of failing than not.
Yeah, but at the same time, to take your analogy a step further, is maybe you don't even need to get out of the batter's box.
Correct.
And maybe you don't round that first base, because once you're full of steam rounding that first base and going into second, you might as well take third.
Momentum is a crazy thing. And again, that's the old saying that love is blind. It's also half stupid, and so, you get caught up. And especially when maybe you met this person that fit what you're looking for, and there was a great connection, and there was that we talked about in the marriage podcast about the 3 forms of intimacy, and they really do take place in dating too, minus the sexual part, but there is a physical chemistry there where I get, my palms sweat when I hold her hand, and I love talking to her, that psychological intimacy, and spiritually we're on the same plane. You know how exciting that is to be on the same spiritual plane? There's an excitement there that unbelievers have no clue how attractive that is. Yeah. So all those things still apply, but no, I would agree with you, Jeremy, that I think we worry more about the boundaries for us first, more than the boundaries we give the person we're dating. We might find ourselves in a better position.
Well, and as we're talking about boundaries, I will say that while there's a beauty to being single, there's also a beauty to the simplistic parts of the physical touch, and there's a beauty to the emotional bond that you can have there, and the spiritual bond, like the intimacy that you just talked about. So don't take that for granted if you're single. Don't try to round first, go for second. Get a triple out of it, because there is a beauty to that you don't necessarily have in marriage. I mean, holding your spouse's hand, while it's still, it is a loving touch, it's not as exciting as that first time you held their hand. It's not as exciting as that second time you held their hand. And so there's a beauty to that, simplicity to that part of being single as well. So don't try to hit a triple, Keep going with triple.
My friend's dad said the only thing better than a first kiss is the second kiss. And that's true when you find. But again, your boundary should be, listen. And if going to first base is just the date, and then I hang on first, I wait there, and or I don't trust myself, so I call for a pitch hitter if we're gonna just drain this baseball metaphor to a close here. So the truth is, and it's that way in life. For every good thing, there's a corresponding bad thing. For a positive thing, there's a corresponding negative thing. And for the beauty of being single, there's a corresponding dark and maybe scary and painful side. But in all of that, what we're saying is you can manage that up front, and therefore make it a little easier for you to navigate this craziness of the world of singleness. And I think those stories, those single love stories, we, as you can tell from some of our past podcasts, there's way too much estrogen behind these microphones. We like the chick flicks and the Hallmark stuff, but so I mean, I love a good love story that starts with a great dating story, and I love stories where they induced self-control and they waited for that moment. I mean, those are some remarkable moments, because I've dealt with people who haven't, and they said, they still got married even after they fell, and they said, I'm glad we love each other, but we felt like we robbed ourselves of that first night. Well, maybe, but the truth is, you ask forgiveness for it, and it's something that you grow from. Yeah. So you ask the question, you found yourself there. It's as simple as going to the author of grace and saying, and believe that he forgives you, and not going on a 12-day binge.
So we've talked about temptation and dating, and I think there's some tangible things that we can take away from this conversation. The first is, and I will go back to the previous podcast on this one, but the first thing when you talk about dating and you talk about all these things is I'd really encourage everyone who's single to really pursue knowing who they are, working through their baggage. Mm-hmm. Well, that's A and B. C, really seeing and getting to know God and his purpose for them. And then D, kind of writing your mission statement, mm-hmm. your vision statement. And if you didn't hear the last podcast, definitely go back to that. What else can we do, Gary?
Well, as we talked about at the last one, is challenge yourself to find, what can I give this future person God brings to me? Not what can this person give me. I'm looking for someone who can fill all my needs. What do I have to offer in fulfilling somebody's needs?
The next thing I think is, after you've done that, I think you're probably a little bit more ready to get into the dating mm-hmm. pool. A lot of people like to dive into that yeah. pool. I would say tiptoe wade into that pool.
Correct.
Slowly get in from the steps, because you really need to realize what dating is, how you work within the whole dating realm.
Yep.
And I think the big part of that is as you start wading in, you're going to say, oh, hey, I need to create this boundary. And that's kind of the next thing is creating yeah. those boundaries that are going to keep you from temptation, keep you focused on your mission and vision and yeah. purpose, and keep you away from those things that are going to distract you from that.
And I think lastly, it's trying to be intentional about trying to find out the inside of that person, who they are, before you're dazzled by the exterior. Because the exterior is the first thing that hits you. And, we always talk about that in marriage counseling. Like you really do have to be attracted to a spouse to some degree. And it doesn't mean it's attracted to their, dimples or their hair. Sometimes you're attracted to somebody's character and their kindness and all those intangibles. But if you make it a point to say, before I get totally wowed by their exterior, I'm going to be observant about the interior part of them. If you know that going in, it causes you to be a lot more observant, and you're probably that'll go right hand in hand with what Jeremy said about wading into that, because you don't get to do that when you dive in. So wading is step by step.
Yeah, and so I think the last thing that we want to share here of tangible things you can do, and I will say this, I absolutely sucked at dating. Um, just absolutely. I had my good points, but there was a lot of bad points there. And a lot of what I'm saying now, a lot of what we're saying now is kind of hindsight 2020 for me.
Yeah. This would have been good if I would have applied this kind of thing.
If we could have done this podcast.
Don't do as I did, do as I say.
13 years ago.
Yeah.
That'd be great. But maybe you find yourself in a place where you fell into temptation of settling or sex, and fallen in that, and I identify with you right there. I know where you're coming from. I will say that it is never too late to turn around and to find healing and to reconcile and to seek forgiveness and really, as Gary said, go to the Creator. Who knows what you're going through. That is something that's not easy.
Right.
It's a hard decision. It's so easy not to do that. But I would say if you really want to pursue the things that we've talked about, that's step one for you.
Yep.
It is really turning around, repenting, confessing, having that reconciliation process and that forgiveness, and then starting anew.
Yep.
So, and you can start anew. That's the other thing I'd say is it doesn't feel like you can. You can.
Yep.
It's just a process.
God's grace is the great reset button, honestly.
Yeah, definitely. So, those are the things that we feel like we can take away, and hopefully that helps someone. I don't know who. Like I said, I wish I would have had that 13 years ago for myself. But again, hindsight is 2020. Yes. And, we hope that if you are married, that you can help someone in this. Don't judge them. Yep. Don't look down on them. Don't, call them names, whether it be, slut or tramp or easy or whatever, or man whore, that one too.
Yeah.
Don't look down on them for that, but instead embrace them, help them through that reconciliation. Support them, come alongside them, and do that as well, even if they haven't fallen. If they're trying to get into dating, help them wade in.
Yes.
Don't help them dive in.
Correct.
Like my dad, when I was about 7 years old, threw me into the ocean head first. You don't want to do that with someone.
You need a child leash on your dating friend. Or a shot collar or something. Yes. Something
to help them out. So help them grow, help them set those boundaries, help them, mentor them in their dating relationship. Things that you screwed up with, you are able to impart on someone who is single now and help them, and not to be ashamed of that, but to use it as a helpful teaching moment. Yep. So feel like you can do that, and hopefully whoever listens to this, hopefully you get impacted by it somehow, either helping or starting anew, or creating these things for yourself.
And if you do, we want to hear about it. How can they get a hold of us, Jeremy?
We have social media platforms: Facebook.com/RP Podcast, Instagram at RP Podcast, and then Twitter at the RP Podcast. If you want to listen to the previous or any other podcast that we've had, you can go to rppodcast.com. Click on the podcast tab, and that has everything that we've done, as well as all the places you can find our podcasts. So I think we've had fun. Yeah. This has been therapeutic to a certain extent. Hopefully it has been for you as well. And I hope that if you found or were impacted by this, that you can make changes and create new paths for yourself in your dating relationships. Thanks so much for listening, and we will see you next time.